Oh, there, I got the banner and the cross between my head between them. Okay, we got about 2 minutes.
When had a movie a cross and the switchblade?
What, 2 minutes?
No,
Oh, the cross and the switchblade, yes.
that was a movie.
It was a book first, and then it was a movie, yeah. Just blow my nose before I go online.
No, we are.
28.
Yep, 1 minute. See? It's on the clock. Oh, okay. Oh. I hear that the clock is behind, so we're going to start. Welcome back. Okay, I've heard that our clock is a couple minutes behind, that it's actually 9:30, so we'll go ahead and get started then. This is our 8th week in the book of Job. Mike Bibby, would you open us with prayer?
Sure, let's pray. God, we're grateful that you put it on our hearts to be here in your presence today, Lord, that we might come and worship you. I pray now, Lord, that as we study Job, Lord, you set your word on our hearts, Lord, that we might hear it with our hearts and our minds. We might meditate upon it. Give John the words, Lord, to provide clarity as he preaches your word, Lord, that it might pierce our hearts, cause us to be stronger in our walk with Christ. I pray these things all in his name. Amen.
Amen. Oh yes, I hear the sound is working now. I heard there had been an echo on the Sunday schools, so that I'm trying to put the microphone closer to my head, my mouth, so maybe it'll be better this time, hopefully. Well, this week I started reading 2 new commentaries on Job, and one is particularly good, if you're interested, by the famous preacher G. Campbell Morgan, early 20th century. It's a great book. It's called The Answer of Jesus to Job. So it does apply the book of Job to the life of Jesus particularly. Now he brought up something really profound that I missed, probably because it's so simple. I should have noticed it, but consider this, that the 2 most powerful beings in the universe, those would be who? Who are the 2 most powerful beings in the universe? God is one, yes. And the Lucifer, yes. The Satan would be the second. He's a created being, so he's not even on the same level. But he is probably the most powerful being ever created. And it's interesting, according to G. Campbell Morgan, that God and Satan are interested in people, like Job. When you think about it, you know, the psalmist David, he says, "What is man that you should consider him? Why would you even think about him?" And that's true. But guess who else thinks about us? The Satan thinks about us. And the reason, this is the profound part of it, the reason they think about us is because we are spiritual beings, half spiritual beings. In other words, God is a completely spiritual being. He is just spirit. The devil is mostly spirit. He does have a shape, but he's not like us with a solid body. We are different because we have bodies and spirits. So the heavenly powers and the earthly evil powers are all interested in humans, and that's because they're fighting over our souls. There was a war in heaven, and Lucifer and his minions were cast out, but there continues to be a Cold War. Even though the war is technically over, it's sort of like near the end of World War II. After the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans were defeated. All they were doing was retreating, but they continued to cause trouble and kill people on their way home. It's just like what's going on in heaven. The war is over, the devil is defeated. However, during the retreat, until he ends up in hell, he's still doing damage on earth. And so basically the idea is the war that goes on is a Cold War for our souls. Satan wants to take souls to hell with him in rebellion against God, and Jesus Christ wants to redeem souls. And so that's what's going on earth, and that's why God and the devil are interested in people. So this is also why, here's what G. Campbell Morgan said, "A human life has wider values than that of its own existence or experience." Okay, do you understand what he's saying here? A human life is more significant than you think, and it's more significant than just you can comprehend, because there are heavenly powers that you cannot see fighting over you. And so a lot of things that happen in your life don't make any sense. And that's exactly what Job is facing here. Job was living a great godly life, doing everything right, being blessed, and suddenly his whole world collapsed, and there was no obvious reason for it. The reason for it was that the war in heaven came to him. And there are times when the war in heaven may come to us as well. And so some things that happen in your life do not make sense, and that's because either God or Satan is working in your life for some purpose. Now, the devil, although the good angels won, like I said, there is still this war over your soul. But a lot of the times, God allows the devil to create disasters on earth or in your life. And the reason is because God is just, and he uses Satan as his tool to punish the wicked at some times. So there are such things as earthly punishments for wicked people. But occasionally God lets the devil hurt us. And the purpose in that case is that he gains glory by showing our faithfulness. You learn more when you lose than you do when you win. I've learned this in chess. We have a chess club that meets here now every month. And when I win, I don't learn much because I won. I don't need to learn anything from it, right? But when I lose, I learn something because, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or that was a stupid move. That's kind of what God allows the devil to do in our lives. He allows the evil powers to cause us trouble to sharpen us, like iron sharpens iron. You know how you have to sharpen a knife blade with a hard piece of rock? Things like that. So he purifies us. So when the devil attacks, his intention is to harm and destroy. When God attacks or allows the devil to attack us, it is so that we will be purified. So there's a difference between the purposes. God has a good purpose for your harms. The devil has an evil purpose for your harms. And yet God is using the devil all the time to do this sort of thing. So anyway, when your life doesn't make sense, like Job's doesn't, just remember that it's probably because angels or demons are fighting over you. And you can't see it, so you can't understand it. So it's not just a matter of God being incomprehensible. It's also a matter of us not having the senses to know what's going on. So that's what's happening with Job. I think that's pretty interesting that G. Campbell Morgan pointed out. So now back to the regular lesson. Job lived in probably the time of Abraham. He was a wealthy, godly man. God allowed the Satan to destroy all of his finances and his family in one day. Some of it was done by evil humans. Some of it was done by God or Satan himself, fire out of heaven and lightning and wind and etc. So instead of cursing God, though, which is what Satan said would happen, Satan said to God, "You are not lovable, God. No one would love you except that you give him goodies. You give him lots of cookies. But if you take the cookies away, he won't love you anymore." Well, the devil was wrong. Job, when he learned of all of these horrible things, fell to the ground and worshipped God. And in fact, rather than cursing God, he said, "Blessed be God." So he survived the first set real well. But the devil didn't give up. He went back to God, and if this was a poker game, you would say he doubled down. He doubled his bet. He says, well, the reason Job didn't falter is because he doesn't care about anyone but himself. He is so selfish, his kids mattered nothing to him. His wealth mattered nothing. As long as he's got his body, he's fine. So if you let me touch his body, then he'll curse you. And so God lets the devil go back for a second round. And God puts a limit on it. He says you can do anything you want to Job, but you can't kill him. So there was that limit. Now the devil, he knows what kind of illnesses will be the worst. Not only for being painful, but for being socially destructive. He uses the worst form of leprosy. It's called black leprosy, or elephantiasis. It has the same symptoms, or has symptoms we'll go through for the rest of the book. But it starts out as red, itchy sores all over his body, feet, legs, body, face, head, hands, and arms. And these red, itchy boils, if you scrape them, they pop like a zit, but then the pus gets everywhere and their skin turns black and scabby. So it doesn't do any good to itch them, even though you do. And sometimes your legs swell up like elephants. You got giant feet, giant hands. You just swell up all over. You vomit all the time. You can't sleep because you're in pain. You have nightmares. This is all the stuff Job went through. But possibly the worst part of it was not the physical, but the emotional part, because his position in the community was lost. By having leprosy, he became unclean and untouchable. And he would have to walk around. If he had been a Jew, he would have walked around saying, "Unclean, unclean," so no one could come near him. Because at that time, no one knew what caused leprosy. Was it demons? Was it bugs? Was it germs? Was it your breath? So no one would come near you because they'd be afraid they'd get it. So this ruined his life, where he used to be sort of the boss in town. Nobody will even talk to him anymore. His wife's kicked him out of the house because she doesn't want to get the leprosy, and he lives at the garbage dump. And it's called Ashes, and there's probably smoke there all the time because people would take all of their waste products, all of their dung, etc. So that's one reason one translation calls it a dung heap, because most of the garbage there would have been dung, and once it dries out, they burn it to keep the piles low. So Job is sitting at the dung pile ash heap. No friends, nothing to do, except pray and feel painful. So William Gurnall, he's a Puritan writer, he points out that Satan shows in this that he has a special power of sickness. I'm not saying that all sickness is from the devil, but this one was. And the reason we know that is because leprosy usually gradually grows on you over years. You don't just get it in one night. But one day Job had it all over. So somehow the devil was able to speed up this process of leprosy and make him a full-blown case almost immediately. So that's a demonic power. Well, we look then at Job 29, and that's where Job was remembering the good old days. The good old days when he would approach the gate, everyone would be quiet because he might have something good to say. He would help the poor and the widows. He would look for justice. And now the good old days are over. Rather than kings and princes deferring to him, now no one will listen to him at all. And he says, even the people who were so ignorant that I wouldn't put them with my dogs, they won't even talk to me anymore. The lowest of the low. So he's all alone. So that's a major blow to your self-respect if you're a respected guy and then suddenly you're nobody. That's kind of hard. You know, a lot of child stars who start out really famous end up committing suicide or dying of drugs because they can't face the loss of attention. They used to be popular and now no one knows who they are. So anyway, Job and these other lepers, if there were any others, would be living at the garbage dump, and they might find scraps of food to eat or rags to wrap around their sores. And it even says that the dogs came to lick his sores. That'd be kind of unpleasant, I assume. Well, Job, fortunately for him, still had one family member left, his beloved wife. And here's what she said in verses 9 and 10. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." What a gal. I want you to notice, though, something interesting. The devil used her, that's obvious. However, what she says is half true and half untrue. In fact, if you take her words literally, she literally speaks the words of God. When God was talking to Satan the second time, he said to Satan, Job hasn't fallen, even though he still holds fast his integrity, even though you incited him against me. Okay, notice that. He holds fast his integrity. What does his wife say? Why do you still hold fast to your integrity? Those are exactly the words of God. Now, how did she know that? She didn't. But who did? The devil. And then the devil's words, the devil said, if you harm Job, he will curse you and die. Well, I don't think he said die, but he said he will curse you to your face. So what does the devil do? He doesn't lie to you, obviously. He lies to you with mostly truth. That's the best kind of lie, because that's the kind of lie you see on the media all the time. They'll tell you something that's true and then slip in something that's untrue or unproven in to make you think it's true. So since you buy the first part, you also buy the second part. Well, that doesn't work on Job. Even though the wife speaks God's words, why are you still holding fast your integrity? Then she adds Satan's words, just curse God. And she throws in die. Even worse. In fact, if you think about it, I would suspect that the devil threw that in. Remember, God told the devil, you can do anything except kill him. Well, the devil would really love to kill him, get rid of him. But he can't. God said no. But God didn't say that his wife couldn't talk him into suicide. It's not the devil's fault if he kills himself, right? So he's trying to get Job's wife. She's just a tool in this case. And that doesn't mean she was not a believer, by the way. I don't think she was demon-possessed. The devil probably convinced her that this was the best course of action. He is in such misery, I just like his pain to be over. If he died, his pain would be done. So just curse God, let God strike you down, and you'll feel better. That's probably what she's thinking. That's what the devil wants her to think. But it's still not right. And so the devil is speaking through her. But remember another case where the devil spoke through someone important. Do you remember? A Christian, through a Christian. Who did the devil speak through? Peter. Remember, Jesus said to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. The devil can speak through good people. And it's usually right after you say something good. Peter had just said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus says, yeah, you're right, Peter. I'm going to Jerusalem to die. You can't go to Jerusalem. I forbid you to go to Jerusalem. Get behind me, devil. So he goes in one moment from being God's mouthpiece to being Satan's mouthpiece. And I think that's kind of what happens here with Job's wife. But Job replies to her, very nicely, you might say, you're speaking like a foolish woman. He didn't say you are a fool. He just said you're speaking like a foolish woman would speak. That's not the way you should be thinking. So he recognizes that she's not herself. And we don't hear about her again through the rest of the book, not until the last chapter probably. So she vanishes. Now, what was Job doing at the ash heap? I'm pretty sure that Job spent a lot of time praying. I mean, what else did he have to do? There's nothing else he can do. He can't talk to anybody unless there's other lepers there. Aside from scratching himself and getting licked by dogs, he can't do anything. So a godly person, you would assume, prays. I'm sure that he prayed when he was burying his children, some months earlier, and he had to be praying, God, what's going on? Why are you doing this to me? I'm sure he prayed for healing. God, would you heal me? Who wouldn't? Now, the Apostle Paul had something kind of like this, not as bad. He had what Paul called a thorn in the flesh. And the church tradition is that he had a leaky eye, that he had some kind of eye disease, maybe in his right eye or left eye, that just caused his eye to drip all the time. So it was painful and sore and ugly. It's kind of hard to talk to somebody face to face when their eyes dripping pus or whatever. So he prays multiple times to God that he would be healed. And what did God say? No. I'm leaving you this problem because it keeps you humble. Okay? So Paul had the danger of being proud. And so he says, now I brag about my problem because it keeps me, I brag about my saying it. But anyway, he gloried in it because God gives him grace. So Job was not answered by God. God asked for healing, or Job asked for healing. God says, nothing. And that's part of the hard thing about this. God didn't say no. Maybe it would have been nice if God said no. What did God say? Nothing. And that's sometimes worse than getting a no, because you don't even know if he's listening. So Job has been praying, I would guess, for weeks or months. Now, I speculated last week that perhaps Job is starting to crack. This is an argument of silence, from silence somewhat. However, in chapter 1 at the end, it said that Job did not sin or speak badly. After the second phase of his illness, it doesn't say that. All it says is he did not curse God. It doesn't say he didn't sin. So it is possible that he has begun to not trust God. He's no longer content. And this may also be evidenced by what I told you before. In the early chapter, Job calls God, my God, Yahweh. That's God's personal name. He always refers to God as my God. Sort of like Jesus says, my Father, Abba, Father. That's what Job used to call God. But from now and through the rest of the book, he doesn't call God Yahweh anymore. He calls him All-Powerful One, or Mighty One, or just plain old God. So it seems like he's given up his personal relationship, perhaps, with God. Now there is a God, but he doesn't love me, and I'm not really sure if I love him. So I think he's starting to crack. But I can't prove that. It's just a thought. You'll see what I mean later. So now we'll get into today's lesson, which is in chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. We're going to talk about Job's friends. So if you look at Job chapter 2, I'll read verses 11 through 13. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamatite. They made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. Each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So let's review briefly what we know about Job's friends, because they have places of, we talked about these in the first week, because we were trying to decide where Job lived. These 3 guys coming from these 3 different places gives us some clues as to where they came from and where Job lived. First of all is Eliphaz. In an ancient list, you usually list the most important person first. And Eliphaz turns out to be the leader of this motley crew, so to speak. He's possibly the oldest guy, or the richest guy, or the wisest guy. We're not sure why he's first, but he takes over the group and he's in charge, which means he gets to talk first. Whenever they talk, it's always Eliphaz goes first. It's interesting, though, that his name, Eliphaz, means God is pure gold. El is God, and Phaz is pure gold. You wonder, why is his name that? Sometimes names are significant, sometimes they aren't. But he was also a rich man, and so you have to wonder, did Eliphaz think of God as his cash cow? Remember, that's what the devil said about Job. Job only loves you because you made him rich. Could that be the case with Eliphaz? Maybe it's true of him, we don't really know. But Eliphaz, he was a Temanite. Now, Teman was a place north of Sodom in modern-day Jordan, not far from Petra. You know that famous, it was in the Indiana Jones third movie, that temple built in the wall. That's Petra. Well, Teman was just a few miles away from that cool place. And Teman was known in the ancient world, even through the time of Jeremiah, which is 1,400 years later or so. Teman was known as a place of wise guys, meaning wise people. Maybe they had a school there of philosophy or something. But whenever you wanted to say, oh yeah, we know a Temanite, what you're saying is, oh yeah, he's a smart guy. He's a genius. He thinks a lot. So that's the interesting thing about his place. It was considered a place of wisdom and knowledge. His words do show also that he had considerable learning and he was well spoken. He knew the language well and he thought a lot. So he's a thinker, an egghead. You might call him a college professor, university professor. He's tenured. So that's Eliphaz. Bildad, the Shuhite, is the second guy mentioned. We don't know much about him. We know that Shuha was a tribe probably near the Red Sea to Job's south. And then finally, the last guy is Zophar the Naamatite. And he seems to be from northern Arabia, so he probably either lived east or west of Job. So you've got one guy north, one guy east or west, and one guy south. And Zophar's name means young bird. It's kind of funny. I don't know what that means exactly. And Naamatite means they were a tribe. They were the daughters of Cain. Naamah was one of Cain's daughters. So these men, though, were good friends to Job. I mean, the text says that they heard about his adversity and scheduled to meet together. Then they traveled together to meet Job. Now, that would take a little time. He had no closer friends. I mean, if you think about it, who are your friends? These are the only three guys who came to help. When you get married, you say you're going to stay with your spouse through thick and thin, richer or poorer, etc. Well, these are the only guys that showed up when Job got sick and lost everything. The people in town obviously didn't care about him anymore. But these guys show up. And his three friends, they meant well when they met together. Now, one reason, why do you suppose they met together? Any ideas on why? Why didn't they just go individually to his place?
I think they have all the answers.
The
Possibly.
Matthew scripture where it says bring more than one witness.
That could be. If they already were thinking that he was evil or gone bad, you'd need more than one witness. That's a possibility. Yep. Here's my reasoning, just practical. If your best friend just got robbed by two different groups of raiders, you're in a war zone, right? So I wouldn't go down there without a gun and without some people. So my guess is that not only did these three guys meet, I'm guessing they took bodyguards with them. So they all got together and formed a nice big band and went together so that robbers and raiders couldn't kill them. That's just my guess. I mean, the Chaldeans and the Sabaeans from the east and the south just wiped out Job's property. You don't want to go down there without help. So that's just my guess is why they went together. But they also said their intention was to mourn with him and comfort him. And I want you to notice that no one else has tried this. At least this is from Silence. Maybe his wife did. We don't know. All we know about her is that the devil used her at that last spot there. But this word for mourning in Hebrew is a very intimate word. It means to rock bodies back and forth. When you think about it, how does a mother take care of an infant? Rocking the baby. How do you sometimes deal with someone who's crying? You hug them and rock back and forth. That's what it meant. These guys wanted to go and mourn with him and comfort him physically. They wanted to hug him and help him. Yes?
That reminds me when our son got passed over when he was 3 years old in our front yard in the driveway. And I remember the first thing I did after pulling him out from behind the car was I sitting in the rocking like this. And I kept saying, no, Lord, please, not again, because our daughter just passed away on March 3rd, in March. So I really like that correlation, that I was warned, I guess, when we do that, we're mourning because our children hurt, so, yeah. So,
And not only does it help with our own mourning over their plight, but it comforts them. That's the main reason we do it, is to try to comfort somebody. And rocking a child back and forth is a way of comforting them. So they liked Job enough to actually plan to go hug him and rock with him. I think that's pretty good. It shows you that they really were his friends. They didn't turn on him yet. It's almost like, if you remember the Peanuts cartoon, you remember the character, who was it that always had a cloud over him and it rained everywhere he went?
Linus.
Linus, he had the blanket too. Okay, so anywhere Linus goes, it's raining on him. Well, it seems like wherever Job goes now, there's disaster. If you're nearby, you're going to get a disaster. And his friends come with great intentions, but as soon as they arrive, the atmosphere changes. I suspect that there was what you would call a strong demonic presence there, and they immediately fell under the spell of this. And we'll see how that happens. But I don't think that they knew that he had leprosy yet. Because I think that's why it says that when they came and saw him from afar, they didn't recognize him, and then they wept and mourned. In other words, I believe that after all of his stuff was stolen and his kids died, they heard the news, they got together, and they started coming before the leprosy hit. I don't think they knew that he had leprosy yet. Maybe they wouldn't have even come. Because their intention was to hug him and rock him. They can't do that when he's got leprosy. That they'll be unclean or contagious or even get the leprosy. So I don't think they knew about this, and so this was a shock when they arrived. The news hadn't reached them when the disease struck. So they saw Job from afar. They didn't recognize him. His body is now covered in boils and scabs. He was probably dirty and smelly and sunburned because he has no shelter in the desert. So they can't touch him. Not only would they be unclean, they might catch the leprosy. So what do? They sit down at a distance and they grieve out loud and weep. This is a common way of showing grief in the Old Testament and in the Middle East, where loud mourning is normal. It's not normal here. Usually we're quiet and respectful. There, it's an obvious show of sadness. Now, we've already discussed the tearing of robes. It says when they sat down, they tore their robes. Job did the same thing when he had his disasters fall on him the first time. He tore his robes. And it says that he cut off, or the other word could be translated pulled out. He might have pulled out his hair, just ripped it out. Because remember, it says that he stood up. He had been seated. He stood up and he tore his robe and he cut off his hair. Well, how many people have a blade sitting right there? Maybe he might carry a knife, but it's also possible that he just tore out all of his hair in mourning. They say that when you're in some kind of shock, you can't even feel pain to some degree. So it wouldn't have hurt that much. But anyway, these guys, though, they don't tear out their hair. They tear their robes and they throw dust in the air on themselves. Now, this is an interesting custom, and there's lots of different opinions on what it means. But it goes throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. There are even passages in the book of Acts where it says that the Jews were so angry at the blasphemy, say of Stephen, for example, that not only did they stone him, they threw dust in the air on themselves. So this is a long Jewish custom and a Gentile custom. The Bedouins still do it sometimes, the tribes who run around Arabia. So what does this mean? I think, this is just my opinion out of many, that this arises from God's curse in Genesis 3:19. When Adam and Eve fell into sin, Jesus told them, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." You know the word Adam, the name Adam? I told you guys this a few days ago. The name Adam means earth man, man made of earth. Or, if you wanted to make it sort of slangy, you could call him dirt boy. Because he's just made out of mud, basically. We are made out of the earth. And when God cursed and said, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return," basically what he meant was, you're made of dirt, and you're going to go back into dirt. Your bodies will go back into the dirt. And you know what happens when you die? They put you in 6 feet under, and they cover you with dirt. Of course, now we have coffins, so we don't really get the dirt. But most people get buried in dirt. They can't afford a coffin. And you rot. And once you rot, you turn into dirt, and you become bug food and plant food. That's your body. Until the Lord raises your body up, that's what you are. When you die, you're bug food. And so that, I think, is what these guys were saying. They're recognizing their own mortality. I'm a dirt man. Job's a dirt man. I'm a dirt man. I'm throwing dirt on myself. I remember the curse of God that I will return to dirt too. So I think they're identifying with death. And what else could you identify with when you see Job? He's a wreck. They probably figure he's about to die. And he probably figures the same thing. So throwing your dust on yourself is just saying, I am mortal, I am dust. And then they were silent for 7 days, right? Well, maybe. You see, what it says is, it doesn't say they were silent for 7 days. What it says is they did not speak to Job for 7 days. Some commentators believe that they sat close together and they talked among themselves while they didn't speak to Job for 7 days. So that's a little worse. You know, it's interesting the wide range of commentaries on Job. I have 10 or 15 of them now. And a lot of them say that these quiet 7 days from his friends were the best time they had with him. They showed their kindness to him by just sitting there and mourning with him. Maybe. Maybe not. The other opinion that I tend to agree more with is that they just didn't talk to him. They talked among themselves. What's going on? What happened to Job? God must be punishing him. I think they're already on their way to attacking him.
I
Yes?
think they would discuss among themselves that they weren't gonna talk to Job. You know,
That's another possibility.
be quiet.
It is quite possible, if you think, for example, we don't know that they thought this, at least not Eliphaz. Zophar maybe. But anyway, in the future of the book, you'll see just how much they turn on him. Eliphaz starts nicely, and he hints at possibilities that Job might have done wrong. Each speech gets worse and worse, until finally at the end they're ready to stone him thinking that he's an evil devil worshiper. So if you arrive and you see that this guy is a wreck, God doesn't love him anymore, and if you believe in devils, you might already believe that he's been attacked by the devil, which coincidentally would be right. But what do you fear then? What if the devils come after us? You know, what if being here, there's devils here, can't you feel this horrible sense around you? You know how sometimes it's weird. I don't know why, but there are times in my life, a few times, not many, when I felt like there was a demon nearby. Your hair kind of stands up and you feel uncomfortable and cold. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but I have a couple of times. And maybe they felt that, and they were already beginning to wonder, you know, if he's got a demon, we got to be careful. We don't want his demons. It's just one possibility. So they are possibly talking to each other. Even if they're not, even if they're still just confused, and it's possible they spent a couple days confused, you have to believe, at least I have to believe, that they had to be terrified of something. Now, there was a play by William Shakespeare, you all have heard of it, Romeo and Juliet. And there's a line in there that's very appropriate to Job's friends. This is the sentence from Romeo and Juliet. He jests at scars who never felt a wound. He jests at scars who never felt a wound. In other words, it's easy enough to tease someone for having scars, or frown on them, or look down on them, or even laugh at them because they've got ugly scars on their faces, if you've never had a scar. You see the meaning of that? This is especially true of children. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I did. I had a very obvious scar on my face all through growing up. It's right here on my lip. It's kind of hard to see now. It's faded a lot. But when I was a baby, apparently, I don't remember, I crawled into a horse stall, and my mom's horse didn't appreciate my presence and went thump and kicked me out of the way. And so I got a nice big old cut across my lip and my nose. So I wore a football helmet for a long time. All my baby pictures, I have a football helmet on. So I had this horrible scar for years. And at school, kids would call me Scarface, and they would tease me all the time because I had this nasty scar. And you know, that's not very nice. But kids don't have any self-control over their minds. They just speak what their minds think. And you know, a lot of times there will be some little cretin at the grocery store. Look at that fat man, Mommy, why is he so fat? You know, that's not nice. But kids don't know that it's not nice. They will learn it when they start getting teased for something, for being short or having big ears or whatever. Kids are terrible at teasing. And it's easy to tease people when you haven't felt pain. Rich people, these guys were all rich. Rich folks can live very sheltered lives and have no concept of hunger or pain or loss. When you've got money, you can pay people to protect you. These guys running our country who are all against guns, that's because they're rich enough to pay bodyguards to protect them. So they don't have to carry guns. It's very convenient. But rich people don't feel the problems that we feel. You may have heard there was an old quote. It's been ascribed to Marie Antoinette, who was a French queen a couple hundred years ago. And it's probable that she never said this, but she's famous for this. People ascribed it to her. Supposedly there was a famine going on in France, and people were starving to death, and the peasants had no bread. They couldn't afford to buy bread because the price of flour was so high. And supposedly Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Now what does that mean? What it means is that Marie Antoinette supposedly was so pampered and wealthy, she had cake everywhere. And so she just assumed that just like her, everyone has cake. Even if you don't have bread, at least you've got cake. So she's just saying, yeah, just give them some cake, they'll be fine. Well, that's ridiculous, obviously. If you can't afford flour, you can't make cake or bread. But it probably wasn't her. It's just a way of poor people condemning rich people, and to some degree it's true that they have no sense of poverty. They don't realize what it's like to be hungry. So Job's friends, they have had no personal experience with suffering. Just like many of us in America, we probably have little personal experience with suffering. Yes, we may have had a death in the family, we might have had depression, we might have had some financial troubles, but the truth is we don't have experience with real, true, deep suffering, where you're about to die, where you've lost everything and you're living on the street like a homeless person, living in a garbage dump. And that means they cannot easily empathize with true sufferers. I suspect that this is what Job's friends were feeling. When Job's friends arrive, they can't deal with what they're seeing. It's not possible. This guy was the richest man, the most godly man on earth. They were his subordinates. Job was the top guy, and these guys were some of his pals. His pals show up, and now he's nobody. He's nothing. What if that happened to me? That's the thing they can't face. Psychologically, it is just too far gone to believe that you might fall into that kind of trouble. It would hurt you, and they do not want to be hurt. So they have to justify in their minds why Job is getting this. And what they decide is that God is punishing him for something. They've probably already decided this. They've been sitting together. The only reason for this kind of death and destruction is because he's a wicked man. We didn't know it. He hid it really well. But that's the only possible explanation. Because if that's not the explanation, then it could happen to me. And that's not possible. You can't face that. Okay, now one reason why they wanted to comfort him and they didn't. They sit down and they don't comfort him. Why? I suspect there's a couple reasons. One of them, how do rich people, and even semi-rich people like us, feel about solving problems? We love to solve problems. So they hear about Job's family dying, and all of his cattle's gone. We can help him. So my guess is that they came not only with bodyguards, but with lots of treasure and animals. Because their plan, most rich guys, when they think of helping their friend who's in trouble, is to get them back on their feet. We'll get Job back on his feet. We can loan him a couple hundred cows, a couple hundred camels. We'll loan him some money. He's good for it. He's a smart guy. He'll rebuild his empire, and we'll get some interest out of it too. We'll help Job. And that's the plan. I think this is another reason they came together, to gather their resources to come help Job. But when they got there, what did they find? Nothing. They can't help him. They are totally helpless. You see, some things can't be fixed. They didn't know about the leprosy, and the leprosy can't be fixed. You can't give him money, and giving him cattle will do no good because no one will business deal with him. No one's going to get anywhere near him, or his cows. If we give him cows, for all they know, leprosy can go through cows too. So there is nothing they can do to help him. If we give him money, it won't do him any good. So all of our plans to help Job are gone.
They didn't have a cure for leprosy.
There was no cure for leprosy. In fact, there still is not a cure for leprosy. There are things that alleviate
They just treated
the symptoms, but there is no cure for leprosy that I've heard of. So, and in the Bible, at this point, this is early in the Bible, no one has ever been cured of leprosy by a miracle either. There have been no healing miracles on earth so far in the time of Job. It's not until Elijah and Elisha come along that you start seeing some healing going on, and maybe David. So their plans are ruined. They planned to come help Job, and now they can't help him. And you know what people feel like when they're helpless? They don't like that feeling. They feel guilty. There's nothing I can do. So they give up on him. The second reason that they give up on him is they planned to comfort him. They planned to hug him and weep with him, but now they can't. They can't touch him. He's unclean. They might get his disease. So there's nothing they can do, and they're really upset about it. Lastly, they probably wanted to console him emotionally, but they didn't. When they saw how bad it was, all they did was be quiet and throw dirt on themselves and talk amongst themselves. They didn't help him at all. The traditional interpretation of commentators is that they were doing right by not speaking. And it is true in a sense, It is better that they said nothing than that they told him what they were really thinking. You know, if they told him what they were really thinking, probably you'd already be in this debate. But they stayed quiet, so it is the smartest thing they did in those 7 days. But after this, things are going to change. And I do believe that their not speaking to him was not because they were thinking, oh, how sad he is, let's help him grieve. It was, what do we do now? What can we do now? They don't know what to do. And they begin to think that the only thing they can do is to rebuke him and get him turned around back to God. So they've already started making the assumptions in their minds. I think, and like Christopher Ash thinks, he's a commentator, he says that their 7 days and 7 nights of silence is eerie, not comforting. It is true that in ancient Judaism, when someone died, people would come to the funeral and they would cry loudly and they would be quiet. So there is a place for quietness. But it never meant you can't speak to the sufferer, you can't hug them. It never meant any of that. So Job's got to be sitting there for 7 days wondering, he's probably delighted to see his friends come. And then they keep their distance and they say nothing to him for a week. You know, there is one ancient tradition in which there are 7 days with not speaking. And you may not be able to guess what it is. When you're dead. If they come across their friend and he's dead, they bury him and then they're silent for 7 days. So to Job, these guys are saying, they think I'm already dead. There's nothing they can do for me. They're not even going to talk to me. I'm just a dead man. So that's got to be what he's thinking. So I don't believe that they were being kind to Job by not speaking. Now, we'll talk a lot more about Job's friends and his own thoughts in the future. But for our closing time, let's talk more about the idea of what should friends do when their friends are suffering. In other words, Christian friends. So not just how they did it back then, but how should we do it? Now, the friends of Job, they started off well. The first step in a ministry of suffering is called the ministry of presence. Not presence with a TS, presence with a CE. Being there. Just going to be with someone in a time of suffering is a big thing. And that was right, what the friends did, to show up. They were the only 3 who showed up. So as bad as they were better than all the other friends Job thought he had. So just being there. And this is one reason why I proposed in the congregational meeting, and I've mentioned it other times, I think we should start a ministry at the Granada Rehabilitation Center. And this is, it's not just to meet their physical needs. In fact, it's not at all to meet their physical needs, because the doctors and nurses are taking care of their physical needs. But what the doctors and nurses cannot do, at least not normally, is meet their emotional or spiritual needs or social needs. Doctors and nurses, if you've ever been there, are all very busy. They're running from one place to another. They don't have a lot of time to stop and chat. So what I'm proposing is that we go just to meet people and talk with them. Read them a book, sing them a song, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just to go and be with them. Now, the biggest issue is not just helping people, it's just that you're being there. And this isn't a rest home either, by the way. This isn't a place where they've gone to die, necessarily. It's just a place where they're hopefully getting rehabilitated so they can go home again. So they're not just about to die and you're not going to see someone pass away while you're talking to them. It's very unlikely. So don't think of it as that. But I think we can help the people there. Now, Philip Yancey, he wrote a very good book. He said, I believe that we in the body of Christ are called to show love when God seems not to. Suffering people often believe that God has left them. And this is one of the problems Job has, is he thinks God has left him. And his friends have left him. Everybody's left him. He's all alone. Some of these people at the Granada Center are spiritually ignorant. They don't know anything about Jesus. They don't even know if God exists, let alone if God left them. They might be sad because their relatives haven't been coming very often and they're just lonely. Or maybe they're afraid because they are facing their own mortality for the first time. You know, it's easy when you're healthy to not think about death. In fact, you usually don't want to think about death. It kind of depresses you. But when you're stuck in a bed and people are feeding you through a tube, it's a lot easier to think about death, mortality. So some of these people are probably afraid, don't know exactly what's coming next. Philip Yancey also says that this is one of the missions of the church that Christ gave us. The nature of the church, he wrote, Jesus' decision to operate as the head of the large body with many members, that's the church, affects our view of suffering. It means that Jesus often relies on us to help one another cope. This is significant. I talked last week in the sermon about the kingdom of God. The kingdom of Jesus Christ is mostly an invisible kingdom, a kingdom of service. And so what does Jesus do? It is true that Jesus can send his Holy Spirit and do a miracle and fix things. It's true that he can send the Satan to go and cause trouble. But most of the time what happens is Jesus sends us. We're the church. We're the body of Christ. We're supposed to be helping people. And so Jesus is not helping them directly, except in the sense that he's helping you help them directly. It's called second causes. So God expects and wants us to be helping people. He doesn't usually send angels to fix them. So sitting comfortably in our homes watching television doesn't help anyone, not even you, actually. There are people with needs that we can help who are nearby. Now, 10 years ago or so, I felt called to go to Sudan as a missionary. And so I was in the PCA at the time, and I went to a 1-week mission school in Atlanta, Georgia. And I spent a week there, and they did all kinds of tests and talking and interviewing and et cetera. They even made us sleep in a room full of cockroaches, see how we react. That was pretty difficult. But at the end of the week, they said, we don't think you should be a missionary, we think you should be a pastor. And I said, no. So I went home and started an eBay store. Well, anyway, it looks like they might have been right. But the fact remains that there are many people here in Eureka who have spiritual and emotional needs that we can help with. You don't have to fly to Africa. You don't have to go to Sudan. In fact, I did some research on Humboldt County this week. Humboldt County, California is just about as pagan a place as you can find on the whole earth. You may not believe that, but looking at the 2010 census, our county has about 133,000 people. That's all of Humboldt County. And in the state of California, 46% of the residents claim to be religious. Okay, so in California as a whole, 46% of all those people think that they're religious. Doesn't mean they're Christians. Just means they feel spiritual. They can be Buddhists, Hindus, whatever. Drug worshippers, I don't know. But 46%, so almost half. Humboldt County has 21%. So we have less than half of the number of religious people that most places have in the state. We are the least religious county in the state of California. Okay? And of those people who claim to be religious, about 10% of them are Catholic, and about 7% are Protestant, and less than 1% are Presbyterians. So a third of our religious people are Catholics, and 20% are Protestants. So out of 133,000 people, 29,000 claim to be religious, but only 14% go to churches that we might consider Christian. Catholic on the edge, I don't really consider it Christian totally, but it is sort of. So what this means though is if 14% of people go to churches where they might be Christians, that means 86% of our people are unchurched and won't need Christ. 86%. So 9 out of 10 of the people you meet here are heading to hell. That's the definition of a pagan country. I mean, that's low. So what are we supposed to do about that? Well, we will talk in future weeks about what we might be able to do at Granada Rehab Center. But today I have something a lot simpler and easier for you to do. I don't know how long we're going to be in this building, but at least for the next 40 days we're here, because they told us we'd have 40 days notice if they're kicking us out. So I spent about $20 on a box of business cards that has our address and our name and a schedule of our services. Here, I'll read it to you. And then I'm going to pass them around so you can have some. Give them to people. That's your assignment for the week, is to give some of these to your friends. So it says, Christ the Redeemer Reformed Presbyterian Church. It's got a Bible here. It says Sunday school at 9:30 a.m., worship at 11 a.m., Bible study Wednesday at 6 p.m. Meets at 1421 California Street, Eureka, California. There's our phone number. There's my name and my email address. So what you can do then with these cards is just give them to people you know, or if you have a conversation with somebody, and, if you don't go to church, we've got a nice friendly church where you can come and visit. So you don't have to convert them. I mean, it'd be great if you did, but just give them a card and see if they want to come. Even if they don't come, planting the seed is what you call it. The Holy Spirit may use it at some future point. Some future year they'll say, I remember that nice person, they had a church over here. Maybe I should go visit a church. They might not even remember us, but they might go to some other church. Most of you are capable of being friendly, and that's what a lot of people need in this world. This is a world filled with Satan's slaves. It is not a friendly place, and it's becoming less friendly all the time. That's because our world is full of evil. But we're supposed to be a light on a hill. And so befriending people is one way of sharing the good news of Jesus with them. Mike Shoemaker, would you close us in prayer?
Father, we rejoice in this time together this morning and the study of the Old Testament, Father. We ask your blessing on the remaining portion of the service this morning, the communion and our meal afterwards, Father. We pray these in Christ's name. Amen.
I forgot to ask if there were any questions or comments.
I was thinking about, not only did he have the boils and stuff, but he was out, like I said, he was out in the sun and sunburn. It's just like a double whammy on the skin.
Yeah, Job's skin was his biggest problem. Leprosy is mainly a skin disease. It is also interesting that when the devil said, if you let me strike his flesh and bone, we use the word flesh and blood, meaning his flesh and his relatives. It could be that that's what Satan was implying. I want to get at his flesh and bones, meaning I want to touch not only him, but his relatives, like his wife and his friends. So I suspect that was a part of what he meant. Yes?
It's interesting that his wife disappears through the rest of the story, but then comes back at the end. Was there a Levitical law that said once he was put out into outside of the camp, was there a Levitical law that released her from that marriage, or was she still technically married to him
In the Levitical law, well, first of all, we don't believe that the Levitical law had been written yet, because that was written in the time of Moses. So at this time, there was no Levitical law. But assuming that the Levitical law was based on tradition, you weren't supposed to divorce somebody just because they had a horrible disease. It's possible. We don't know what she did exactly. All we know is that she kicked him out and she hated the smell of his breath. That's the only thing we hear about her. But it is interesting that at the end of the book, God gives him 10 more children, presumably from her. So they reconcile. And I believe that proves also, even though the book doesn't say it, it never says that God healed him from his leprosy, but we have to believe that happened, because there's no way he's going to have more kids and become wealthy again while he's living in the dump. So I think that it was just implied that he was healed.
Okay.
No, I don't think she remarried or could reject him. I mean, she probably wanted to.
But couldn't. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, then I'm going to pass out some of these cards, and you can come get them. Take 10 or 15 or 20. I made 250 of them, so you could all have 15 or 20 of them if you wanted to. And we'll come back for our service in 40 minutes.
You didn't make it? No. Well,
Yes.
Yeah.